Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This is Noble Narwhal here, and today I have a video that I've been wanting to make for a while now. Today I have my full commentary, review, analysis, whatever you want to call it, of Halo 2. This is a video I've wanted to make because I've been a Halo fan my whole life pretty much, but I did take a pretty considerable hiatus. I stopped playing for a long time, but then I really wanted to get back into it. I played through Combat Evolved, but I really wanted to play Halo 2 and just talk about, my experience going back and playing through it, how it innovates, what the story and gameplay is like, that kind of thing. So grab your energy sword and let's get started. The opening cutscene is amazing. In short terms, it shows the Arbiter, or who is soon to be the Arbiter, on trial for his failure to protect the Halo ring from the last game. It gets you to sympathize with him and introduces his character, which helps make it less jarring when you play as him later on. The opening cutscene broadens the scope of the world enormously because this is the first time the player gets to see the Covenant. The Arbiter's trial is also a great way to restate what happened in the last game without it feeling forced. On the other hand, it also shows characters like Master Chief and Sergeant Johnson getting awards for what they did in the last game. It also introduces a couple new characters like Lord Hood and Miranda Keyes. The cutscene switches back and forth between the two to show how opposite the UNSC and the Covenant are, the juxtaposition if you will. I don't think that's how you use that word. The cutscene shows us more of the Covenant. Well, not more, because this is the first time the players have seen the Covenant. This cutscene shows us what their society is like, and it introduces the characters we'll get to know later in the game, like Tartarus and the Prophets of Truth, Mercy, and Regret. Another thing the opening cutscene does is it not only shows what happened in the last game, but it also shows the impact of the last game on the story. It shows that what you did in Combat Evolved was actually important. We see the direct impact on the Arbiter, as he's on trial for his failure to stop you, the player, in Combat Evolved. Then it goes back to the ceremony, and there are Covenant ships on the way to Earth. Lord Hood makes a remark about how small the fleet is. We'll find out later. And then it cuts to the first level, Cairo Station. Cairo Station is one of my favorite levels after replaying this campaign. It's an amazing introduction to the new type of levels that are present in Halo 2. Halo 2 innovates from the first game in its levels being more close quarters and linear. I know when you hear the word linear, you immediately think bad, but Halo 2's level design is just the opposite. The levels are focused around arenas, but instead of being big and open like in CE, this time they're smaller and tighter. Halo 2's levels have arenas where you'll fight waves of enemies. Arenas are places where you fight enemies for a prolonged amount of time because you're either completing an objective or there's an obstacle or for whatever reason. Each level is a linear path with an arena here and there where you stop and fight enemies. For an example, the beginning of Cairo Station has you moving through corridors. Then you'll get to the first arena of Halo 2, which is a room where waves of enemy come in through boarding ships. In an arena, you're not always moving in one direction. In the example in Cairo Station, the big room where enemies are boarding, you move around the room through cover and go on a balcony that's on a higher elevation as more enemies enter. Speaking of higher elevation, this was hardly seen in Combat Evolved, but in Halo 2 it's much more common to have arenas with multiple stories. You see what I'm getting at. And I'm not making this up either. For one, all of this is true, you can play the game yourself, but also developers said it themselves in an interview that the level design for Halo 2 was focused around smaller, tighter areas. You can find the interviews on YouTube, it's pretty neat. Halo 2's levels are meant to be faster than Halo 1. You can see this in arenas because you're constantly moving around the area fighting groups of enemies. Like I said, Halo 2 is much tighter than Halo 1. The levels are much more dense. You could make the argument that they both have big and small levels, like the Pillar of Autumn in CE, which is true, but levels like that are not common in Halo 1. There are more big open levels. Even in Halo 2, the biggest open areas aren't as large and expansive as they were in CE. They aren't huge open areas anymore either. They're linear and much smaller. The levels are focused this time around, dense moments of combat without big explorable areas. In one of the interviews, a developer said that the levels in Halo 2 were going to be bigger than the levels in Halo 1. Well, that doesn't make sense. That goes against everything you just said, is what you're thinking. While this is true on a gameplay level, think about the environments the levels take place in. Cairo Station, while it is mostly close quarters fights, is a whole space station. It feels like a big place, and it feels real. You can see other parts of the station through the windows, and the scale is shown even more when you go outside. It feels natural rather than just being a set of corridors. The Pillar of Autumn from Halo 1 hardly feels like you're in a spaceship at all. It feels like you could be in a building. Most of the corridors are narrow, and there are barely any windows. Halo 2 does much better at this, with it having many large windows that let you see to other parts of the station and even to other parts of the world around you. The levels are more linear, but the worlds surrounding the levels feel large and expansive. There are other examples of this, but we'll get to those later. Getting back to the actual level, we hear a Marine on the comms stating their victory at one of the other stations, followed by that station exploding in the distance. This is an example of storytelling that doesn't take place in a cutscene. It's not shoved in your face. It shows you what's happening in the level design instead of a cutscene. Throughout this level, the player is able to get used to the new level design and see all the innovations. In one part, you go outside of the station briefly and fight elites. It's a cool scene where you can see some of the stuff happening outside of just Cairo Station. Drones are also introduced in this level in the elevator section. As an enemy, they're alright. It's something different, which is nice, but I can't say I'm the biggest fan of fighting them. Also, during the elevator, the giant mag cannon is visible. You can see it fire rounds into space, which shakes the whole station. After more fighting, the mission ends in one of the coolest scenes in the game. Master Chief disarms the bomb after a fight with elites, and an amazing soundtrack to back it up, then asks permission to leave the station. Lord Hood is serious in the beginning, but then Chief asks to give the Covenant back their bomb, and he goes out of character a bit, just a little bit. An epic cutscene ensues again with an awesome soundtrack, and that's the end of the first level. Outskirts and Metropolis are the next levels, and they're probably the most beloved missions of Halo 2. They're often lumped together as well, which is kind of what I'm doing. Outskirts starts off with a cutscene of the battle taking place on Earth. This cutscene is super visually impressive, and really cool too. It feels like a large, intense battle is taking place in New Mombasa. It introduces the Scarab, which the player will face off with in the next level, that being Metropolis. This cutscene also reinforces Sergeant Johnson's role as a main character. Before Halo 2, he was kind of in between being a main character and side character, because he wasn't very commonly found in cutscenes, but now he's a main character, and one of the best ones too. Sergeant Johnson's remarks about the message of regret is not only entertaining, but it gives exposition in a seamless way. It's really well done because it doesn't feel forced at all. It allows the other characters of Cortana and Miranda to give exposition as to why the Covenant only landed here instead of anywhere else. Well, they don't say why, they're asking the question why, but before this, the player didn't know this was the only place they landed at all. It's a really great cutscene, and it's really well done on a visual presentation level as well. The level begins with the player getting out of the crashed Pelican. The following sequence is probably the best example of an arena I can give. It's a large multi-story area where you fight waves of enemies in different situations. But we already talked about that. While it is a well-designed area, it kind of lacks the intensity found in the cutscene earlier. It feels like you're just standing around a lot of the time until the next section. This arena and the levels of Outskirts and Metropolis give the opportunity to experiment with many of the new sandbox elements. Dual wielding is a new mechanic in Halo 2 that makes guns that otherwise wouldn't be very useful on their own into very effective weapons. The SMG, for example, isn't great by itself, but paired up with another SMG or a plasma rifle, and it shreds through elites. The SMG and plasma rifle combo is a personal favorite of mine. The battle rifle is another new addition, which is meant to be the replacement for the pistol, which is much less deadly in this game than the last one. The battle rifle is supposed to be the standard weapon that's always useful. Also, the assault rifle is completely removed from Halo 2. It's replaced by the SMG. There are many other weapons added in Halo 2, like the beam rifle. There was no beam rifle in Halo 1. There was no long range or even medium range weapon for the Covenant. While the sniper jackals can be frustrating, they serve a purpose to be able to counter you at long range, which was impossible in Halo 1. This is shown in the next section in Outskirts, which is a long, narrow path you have to go down with sniper jackals up high at the end. Speaking of beam rifles, they're a very good weapon to give your Marine, which is a new mechanic in Halo 2. You can swap weapons with Marines, which can be used to just take a gun from them that you want, like Sergeant Johnson's sniper earlier in the level, or it can be used to give them better weapons, so they can be more effective in combat. The Carbine as well is a new addition that gives the Covenant mid-range capabilities. These new weapons give the player more options to use, but also make it more fair at longer ranges. More weapon choices allows the gameplay to be faster and constantly changing, because that's what you'll be doing, constantly switching your weapons. You could start a level with a battle rifle and an SMG, but by the end of it you'll be using a beam rifle and carbine. This is also because of dual wielding. You wouldn't use dual SMGs for a whole level. It's something you would use in one arena or one close quarters fight, then swap for something else after ammo runs out. And it will run out with two weapons using the same ammo pool. You would dual wield two guns for one encounter or one fight because you can't even melee or throw grenades with two weapons. The gameplay is about picking up two weapons, using them to kill a group of enemies, then swapping to throw a grenade at another group and use a longer range weapon. You can't hold on to them forever because of the ammo for one thing, but also because you'll need to use a different type of weapon soon enough. Dual wielding is only for close range, so you'll need to drop your two guns for a long range weapon for the long range encounter that's probably just around the corner. This is true in Outskirts. I used an SMG and a plasma rifle for the courtyard area, then swapped to a battle rifle and sniper for the longer range section. Dual wielding is another thing that makes combat in Halo 2 faster and more aggressive. The sandbox and gameplay philosophy that developers had was to be able to use any gun you find in a level. You're supposed to use the guns you have, not save them for later. Then once you run out of ammo, you can switch to a different gun. You should be able to not have to worry about saving ammo for later, and use it all in the current moment. This is also in part because of the enemies. I mentioned sniper jackals, but there are more new enemies we'll get to later. But I'm taking this one level at a time. The next section of Outskirts is the first Warthog section of Halo 2. This section is very different from the Warthog sections of Halo 1. For one thing, it starts out with an intense fight. You drive around on the beach where there's ghosts, turrets, and elites dropping from the sky. Also, quick interlude, this beach section is another example of what I said earlier about the levels feeling like real places in fleshed out worlds. You can see the bridge that you drive across in the next level. But anyway, the beach part is a very intense battle. This is a stark contrast to Halo CE. which mostly had you taking relaxing drives with not a lot of combat. Halo 2 does the opposite of this. Outskirts and most of the Warthog sections in this game are heavily combat focused. This would be an issue with the Halo 1 Warthog that felt like you were driving around on ice or sprinting in Halo 4. But the Halo 2 Warthog has a new sense of weight to it. It feels a lot better to drive and maneuver around than before. This is true for the Ghost as well. The Ghost is also available to use in Outskirts, which I did use for the tunnel section. The Ghost feels maneuverable and weighty as well. It also has the new feature of Boost, which lets you quickly get away from something or ram enemies. Outskirts ends after the first tunnel section, and we get another classic cutscene with Sergeant Johnson. This time there's no exposition to analyze, it's just a good cutscene. Metropolis starts out with a vehicle section, which is why I put these two levels together. They both show the new vehicles and how they handle differently. The visuals for this bridge part are amazing as well. I play on the original graphics for gameplay, but I put the remastered graphics for the cutscene. I used the original graphics because the anniversary graphics sometimes change the art direction and the atmosphere. The visuals for this bridge part are really great. Look at the sky in the distance. It shows the conflict and the battles that took place in the city. But on the anniversary graphics, it doesn't have the same look to it. The tank feels pretty similar to the CE tank. If you're lucky, you can get into a Wraith at the end of the big bridge section. The Wraith is similar to the energy sword, in that it was in the last game, just not usable. But now you can use it. I'll talk more about the Wraith later, because you're really not supposed to use it here, and you can't use it for very long anyways. The rest of the level is another tunnel sequence, similar to that in Outskirts. Then it has a big round arena with both on foot and vehicle combat. The Gauze Hog is introduced here, which is great for taking out vehicles, and it comes in handy for the next few arenas. The next few areas are also compact urban areas, which would not have been played very well in Halo 1. But things like this are possible in Halo 2 because of the new weightiness of the Warthog. Also, I have to mention the music for this part, which is phenomenal. The final part of Metropolis is the Scarab fight. The Scarab is good, it's a fun fight, but it's nothing like the Scarabs of Halo 3. In Halo 3, the Scarabs are enemies with AI, but the Scarab of Halo 2 is part of the level design. It's not bad, it's a cool fight to end the level with, even if it is just a moving platform on a gameplay level. But this is a huge departure from Halo 1, which was known for its big landscapes. This is a tight, moving alien vehicle you get to fight on. After the fight, the Prophet of Regret that was mentioned at the start of the level is now fleeing through a slip space portal. It's stated that the Covenant had so few troops, it's like they didn't know humans would be here. This plotline and the thing about the Covenant coming only to this part of Earth isn't expanded on until Halo 3, where we find out it's because of the Ark. All of this was supposed to be in Halo 2. There actually wasn't supposed to be a Halo 3 at all. But because of the time constraints, the story would have to be finished in 3 games instead of 2. This is why the ending is a cliffhanger. But anyway, we follow Regret through the portal, and that's the end of the level. Halo 2 starts off very strong, but now it's time for the first big twist. In Halo 1, the Covenant was not the main focus of the game. Their backstory and who or what they are is not explained in that game. This let Halo 1 focus more on the setting of Halo and what it is, while the Covenant remained just some goofy aliens. In Halo 2, we already know about Halo. We already know about Guilty Spark. So this allowed the developers to focus on other things, like Earth, the Flood, and of course the Covenant. The Arbiter is the window into the Covenant that allows us to understand their side of the story. This is also a huge thing that's different from Halo 1. A common problem with sequels is being too similar to the original, but Halo 2 is completely different from Halo 1 because of the Arbiter. The developers didn't want to make a game that was just like the original, and the addition of the Arbiter was what helped make Halo 2 stand out from all the other Halo games. After 3 missions as Master Chief, the game pulls its biggest twist. It shows the Arbiter being brought to the Prophets for his execution, but the Prophets have something else in mind. Arbiter puts on the armor and takes up the role. The Arbiters do missions for the Prophets for the Great Journey. It's an important role, but it doesn't have the same honor as his old job of being a commander of ships. He's disgraced and marked with shame, and he is pretty much forced into being the will of the Prophets, as the shipmaster says. But this isn't the twist. The twist is that you play as him. It was a bold decision on Bungie's part to make half of the game from the Covenant or the Arbiter's point of view, but it is absolutely the right one to make. It separates Halo 2 from all the other Halo campaigns, because half of it is from the perspective of the Covenant. Sure, Arbiter was there in Halo 3, but he was already separate from the Covenant at that point, and there were no levels with just him. It was the right decision to make the Arbiter as big of a part of the game as he is, because without him, we wouldn't have the story that we have. The Arbiter's story has some of the best moments in all of Halo, but we'll talk about those as we get to them. For now, we have to talk about the level of the Arbiter. The first thing I want to mention is that, being the Arbiter, you play alongside other elites, and just like Master Chief, you can give them weapons. This is huge because the elites are way stronger than Marines. You can give them swords or fuel rod guns, which make them very powerful allies, though maybe too powerful. The actual level of the Arbiter is more corridors and arenas, and it's debated whether the Arbiter's levels, such as this one, are good or not. The Arbiter the level isn't bad in my opinion. Sure, it can get a little repetitive in the samey looking corridors, but it's fine. This is also the first time we get to use an energy sword, which spices it up a little. Another mechanic that's introduced is the Arbiter's ability to go invisible. This is a cool mechanic because it lets you sneak up on enemies, but the really cool thing and the big thing it's used for is to get yourself out of a tough situation. So I should mention that the whole point of this level is to track down and kill the heretic leader. After a while we find him and have to chase him in a Banshee. The Banshee is improved a lot from Halo 1. Similar to the Warthog, the Banshee was mostly used for transportation in that game. In Halo 2, it's pretty much in combat sections only. Again, just like the Warthog and the Ghost, it is much more refined. It feels more maneuverable and just better to fly. You can even do flips in the sky, which makes some pretty good aerial combat. While we're in the sky, we get a good view of the setting we're in. It's a big gas mining facility and it has a great skybox. This is an example of the setting feeling like a real place, because you can fly around the whole thing. The visuals for this flying section are so unique. You can see the whole facility with a weird skybox in the background. It's a really interesting design. Once the flying part is over, the level of the Arbiter ends. The next one is the Oracle, which begins with a cutscene of us entering the facility and the shipmaster saying he smelled the stench before. By the way, the voice actor does an incredible job with his role. So we enter, and of course the Flood is here. The Flood is not a lot of fun to fight, and neither are the Sentinels. The Oracle has a lot of similar corridors in the beginning, except this time there's Heretics and Flood. The parts where there's both of them fighting each other aren't bad. It's quite enjoyable to see the battle play out. But all good things must come to an end, so there's a long elevator ride. This part is pretty bad. It's just a slowly moving elevator with the occasional Sentinel or Flood spawning in. It's made a little better by having your elite allies though. So we eventually get off and we keep chasing the heretic leader until eventually we find him and he locks himself in a room. From here onward, the level is pretty fun. The Arbiter has to cut the chains of the facility so it goes into free fall, and this part is pretty chaotic with all the flood and sentinels. Then we run through more rooms until we find the heretic leader and face our first boss fight. But before that, there's a cutscene where the Arbiter and the heretic leader interact with each other. The heretic leader says the great journey is a lie. Then when the Arbiter asks where he learned this, the Oracle 343 Guilty Spark arrives. And just when the Arbiter was about to find out the true purpose of the rings, the heretic leader shoots him and starts the fight. This is such a dumb decision because the Arbiter was listening. He would have listened to what the Oracle had to say, but no, you had to shoot him. The Arbiter was listening. He was listening to the Oracle talk about the rings. This is the beginning of his gradual change to the other side. He's starting to realize that there's more about the rings and the great journey than the prophets have been telling him. The Arbiter's story is phenomenal. It shows him slowly shifting to the other side over the course of the game. The fight itself is not great. I was playing on normal and was able to one-shot him and the holograms with my sword. Tartarus arrives in a phantom and picks us up, and that's the end of the level. I wouldn't say these two levels are bad, but they're certainly not the best. And there are underwhelming parts of them. The Arbiter is good and the Oracle has some bad parts, but it's mostly good. Don't worry though, some of the other Arbiter missions we'll get to are much worse. So the story picks up where we left off with Master Chief. We chased after Regret through the slip space portal and we arrived at Delta Halo. This is not as good of a reveal as the original, simply because the original exists. This is a common problem with sequels to great games. While this moment, the reveal of another Halo ring, isn't as fascinating as the original, the overall story of Halo 2 is much different than Halo 1, which we'll get into later. The Chief and company land on the ring with the goal of killing Regret, and while the reveal of the Halo ring is similar to the reveal of the first one, the opening scenes are much different. In Halo 1, the first few minutes of the level were spent slowly traversing the giant mysterious landscape and taking out handfuls of enemies with foreigner structures, whereas Delta Halo begins with a bombastic firefight in ancient ruins. This level as a whole is honestly a slam dunk, and even Regret is too, I would say. From a level design perspective, Delta Halo is amazing because it has multiple varying types of layouts. I'm not going to go in depth into them because I would be repeating a lot of recurrent writing and it would get quite repetitive. The opening section is an arena where you fight waves of enemies until a pelican drops off a warthog for you. From this point, you drive around to the next section and hear one of the most notable Halo lines, except me I guess, it just didn't play for some reason. Sergeant Johnson's line played, but not the Marines. You clear out some ghosts and take out the enemies in the structure. Then we get another tank section. We drive through the overgrown ruins, taking out ghosts along the way. Then we arrive at the big valley, I guess you would call it. There are enemies scattered throughout across multiple levels of high ground and low ground. This section also has my favorite soundtrack in the game. I've mentioned the music a couple times so far, but I haven't really said much about it. The music adds so much to the experience and adds to the unique feeling of Halo, and this level in particular has some of the best tracks. The track in the opening section is great too. The music in this level and the vibe as a whole is so calming and relaxing, yet it also has a unique sense of wonder that's unique to Halo. This level is just amazing. The level design is phenomenal, the music is phenomenal. I could talk all day about this, but you've already heard about the level design, and the sandbox, and the world. By the way, this level is gorgeous, even in the old graphics. Regret continues from Delta Halo. Half of this level is spent riding on a gondola, and while most people don't like the gondola sections, and I can agree it's not great game design, I don't mind them that much. Most of the time you're accompanied by an awesome soundtrack, and the view is also great. From a gameplay standpoint, the gondola rides are lacking anything interesting, but the view of Delta Halo is great here, and so is the soundtrack. You can actually see where the Arbiter gets dropped off in the next level, Sacred Icon, which is where Delta Halo's version of the library is. That level also plays like the library, but we'll get to that. And you can see the lake we're riding on right now from that point where the next level starts. It's a nice touch, and what's that? Oh yeah, it makes the world feel real. Following the gondola ride is the part where we go underwater and get another great soundtrack. I completely forgot about this part, and I don't remember it at all. Also, the Marine I had in the thing with me was telling me about how his family died on Reach, and when he killed an enemy he would say that's for his little brother. You gotta love the Halo Marines. There's a fighting section in the underwater area, and it's more of the same, it's fun. The final part of the mission has the player take on Regret and his crew defending him. To be honest, I was kind of expecting more, not from the boss fight, obviously it's not that great, but from the fight surrounding it. I'm playing on normal, and all there was just a few elites. But anyway, the level ends after we beat Regret to death and jump into the lake to escape the Covenant ships, and Master Chief gets grabbed by the Gravemind's tentacles. So far, the game has been great. It's had an amazing run of not a single bad level. I'm gonna tell you right now that ends here. Sacred Icon takes place in Delta Halo's version of the library, and it plays like the library too. But first, the cutscene shows us that, following Regret's death, the elites have been replaced by the brutes as the honor guards. The Spec Ops commander tries to persuade the prophets that they should be given a second chance, but they insist the elites aren't capable enough for the task. The Arbiter then enters and is given his task to retrieve the icon. But getting to the gameplay, it's not great. The only enemies we fight here are Flood and Sentinels. Most of this level is really just not that fun. A lot of it takes place in gray corridors. The Flood wasn't very fun to fight in Halo 1, and that stays true here. We're introduced to the new Sentinel ship enemy. I don't know the actual name, but it's the one that has the shields in front and the little arms. I actually don't mind these. On foot, you want to be below them so they can't shoot you, but in a vehicle it'll insta-kill you if you go below it. I really don't have a lot to say about this level. Like I said, most of it takes place in gray corridors, and it's not a lot of fun to fight only Flood and Sentinels. There are some parts where you see the outside though. In the beginning of the level, there's a part where you're riding a gondola from one section of the library to another, and you can see the snow falling from the sky. This part has amazing visuals. It's honestly great to look at, especially coming from the gray interior. Also at the end of the level, we go to the outside and get to fight with elites. This is very short though, because this is at the end, which just leads into the next level. A common complaint or criticism of the Arbiter's level is that we never fight against humans. We get to play as the enemy faction from the first game, but we never fight against humans. All we fight is Flood and Sentinels and Heretics. It makes sense why people complain about this, but at the same time it makes sense why it is the way it is. The truth is, Marines are just not fun to fight. They wouldn't be much better than the Flood or Sentinels. From a story perspective, the Arbiter is sent to the library to grab the sacred icon, like I said. The Flood is here for the same reason they were here in the library in the last game. They know what the index is for, and they're trying to stop you from getting it. Tartarus also appears in the level, as he does in the Arbiter's previous missions. The two of them have an uneasy relationship. Tartarus appears repeatedly so as to make his betrayal more impactful, which we'll get to. The reason the Arbiter is the one to go get the index isn't currently known to the player. The player could assume the Arbiter is the one sent on this mission because, well, he's expendable. This is what the Arbiter is for, isn't he? This is true, but not in the way you think. This is the reason the Arbiter is sent on this mission, because his life doesn't matter. But it's for a reason a new player wouldn't expect at this time. This level and the next one are where the story gets really interesting, with its twists, but for now we have to get through the levels. That's one down, we still have Quarantine Zone to go. Quarantine Zone takes place immediately after Sacred Icon. The only thing separating them is a cutscene, and then you go back to the same place. This 2-level format is used for pretty much the whole game, except for Cairo Station, and maybe the last few levels depending on how you think about it. Outskirts and Metropolis, Arbiter and The Oracle, and Delta Halo and Regret are all examples of 2 levels that have a cutscene in between, but otherwise they're just continuing from the previous level. But getting back to Quarantine Zone, it begins with one of the coolest cutscenes in the game, where the Spec Ops commander rallies up the troops and gives a speech about stopping the flood. Combined with the epic music in the background, this really is just super cool. It's not adding anything to the story, it's just awesome. So pretty much all of this level is a vehicle section. Quarantine Zone is basically just one big vehicle section. The first vehicle you start in is the Spectre. The Spectre is the Covenant version of the Warthog. It's a 4-man vehicle with a gunner on the back and 2 guys on the sides. The Spectre only featured in Halo 2, which is a shame as it's a cool vehicle to use with your elites. On a gameplay level, it functions exactly the same as a Warthog, but it's still a neat addition. The mission isn't only the Spectre though. You can use a variety of different vehicles in this level, including Scorpions and Wraiths. The Wraith wasn't usable in Halo 1. It's similar to the Energy Sword or Fuel Rod gun in that it was in the last game, just not usable, but now you can use it. Of course, it's the Covenant's tank equivalent, except its shot has an arc instead of being straight. It also has a quick boost for ramming, maybe a predecessor to the chopper in Halo 3. Quarantine Zone has a variety of visuals, including gray structures, ruined gray structures, and the outdoor snowy parts, which are my favorite. The atmosphere in the snowy sections is really nice. It's nighttime and the snow is falling, which is nice to look at. Combined with a mixture of explosions from both Covenant and human vehicles, this level has a unique visual style. The problem is the gameplay. The gameplay in this mission is just not very exciting. Like I said, it's mostly one big vehicle section, and it can get repetitive. The gameplay isn't the worst, it's just not the most fun. I'm not really sure how to describe it. I don't dislike playing through Quarantine Zone. I think the main issue here is the repetitiveness of the level. In Delta Halo, you have on-foot combat mixed with the vehicle section, which is what makes that level so great. But here the vehicle section takes up most of the level. Most of it, not all of it. Towards the end you get on a gondola and fight Flood, which isn't great either. After a while fighting Flood, we get to the end where we find the activation index. But we're not the only ones going after it. Sergeant Johnson and Miranda Keyes are already there. The Arbiter gets into a fight with them when Tartarus arrives and takes care of it. This is the point when Tartarus betrays the Arbiter. The Arbiter tells him that the Prophets will know about this, but Tartarus says the Prophets ordered him to do it, and blasts him into the hole. So at this point, the Prophets have betrayed the elites, and the Covenant civil war begins. This twist is insane. If you remember what I said about the reveal of the Halo ring and how it's similar to Halo 1, this is what I was talking about when I said the story was completely different from the original. There was nothing like this in Halo 1. Halo 2 tried to not just be another game like the first one, and it paid off. The story is incredible and very different, especially because of this twist. It is mind-blowing for the brutes to betray the elites.
Fool. They ordered me to do it.
The level Gravemind begins with a cutscene of the Master Chief and the Arbiter in the Gravemind's tentacles. This is the only time in the game where the Master Chief and the Arbiter come into contact with each other. They have a short exchange, but at this point in time, the Arbiter still thinks of him as the demon. That will change later because they both have the same end goal, but that's for later. The Prophet of Regret also arrives to the Gravemind's den or lair or whatever you want to call it, except he's not just wrapped up in the tentacle, he's part of it. I'm not really sure how he got there or how he's still alive after we last played as Master Chief. An Oracle is also here, except it isn't the one from earlier. The Oracle explains that the Index is used to activate the ring, which is what the Covenant are trying to do, which they believe is the Great Journey. The Oracle then says that the ring's purpose is to contain the Flood, to which the Gravemind responds that the ring's activating is both the Great Journey and the containment of the Flood. They are the same thing. Before we go further, I would like to talk about the Gravemind itself. A Gravemind is a Flood form made up of many different beings, and it has the combined knowledge of all of them, which it explains in the line he says in response to the Arbiter after the Arbiter says to not waste his time with talk, saying there will be much talk and it has listened. It knows many things from over the years, which is what makes it such a threat. The Flood aren't just mindless zombies. The inclusion of the Gravemind in Halo 2 reduces a lot of the mystery of the Flood that was there in Halo 1. But I don't think this is a bad thing, because without the Gravemind being introduced, this whole part of the plot wouldn't make sense. The Gravemind needs to stop the Covenant from lighting the rings, or else all of the Flood will die, so he sends the Chief and the Arbiter to two places where the Index will probably be. Without the Gravemind being in the game, it would be difficult to explain how they got there, or at least it would be less interesting. So the Arbiter goes to the place where the rings get activated, which is the next level, and the Chief gets sent to High Charity, the Covenant's holy city. The Index is currently on High Charity in the hands of the Covenant, so Master Chief's objective is to retrieve it. In this instance, the humans, the Arbiter, and the Flood have the same goal of stopping the Covenant from lighting the rings, which is why the Gravemind doesn't just kill the Chief and the Arbiter where he has them. This even happens again in Halo 3 in the mission The Covenant, when we fight alongside the Flood to stop Truth. So Master Chief arrives at the city of High Charity, and this is the first time we fight brutes, and I'll be completely honest, they suck. Brutes in Halo 2 are huge bullet sponges and are incredibly frustrating to fight, especially when they go berserk. Brutes are able to drop their gun and run at you and try to beat you to death. This is super hard to deal with without an energy sword. Thankfully, energy swords are available for most of the level, but even on normal difficulty, it takes 2 swings to kill them. A lot of this level takes place in corridors of High Charity. We fight against pretty much every Covenant enemy. We fight brutes, grunts, jackals, elites, drones, and hunters. And because the Great Schism has begun, there are parts where we see brutes and elites in the middle of fighting each other. A lot of the time, it's advantageous to let it play out and take out the stragglers. Also, the music in this level is amazing. I actually didn't know that In Amber Clad and Peril were used in Gravemind. If you remember, those were the 2 tracks I said were my favorite in the Delta Halo part, so it's cool to see them used here. Also, the song Blow Me Away is used here, which is the song the band Breaking Benjamin made for this game. It's cool to hear something like that in the game, even if it is a little out of place. Among the purple corridors, there are outdoor sections as well. Although I guess it's not technically outdoors because we're still in the ship, which is absolutely huge, by the way. The outdoor areas let us see how big High Charity really is. We're on the outer sections of High Charity, but we can see into the center area of the city. This lets the player view how the Covenant operates and how some of the lower classes are treated, and what it's like to live in the Covenant. The part that we're on is the wealthy outskirts that is likely for the prophets, while the grunts and jackals live in the cramped urban center. While the part we're on isn't the hell that the lower social classes have to live in, the whole city is covered in a gray fog. During the level, the In Amber Clad, which Miranda and Johnson are on, crashes into the city. The mission ends a little abruptly after more fighting in corridors, and we see a cutscene of the two of them being captured. The Flood arrives, one of them latches onto Mercy's neck. Truth says to leave him, then Truth and Tartarus leave with the index to the control room. The following mission, Uprising, is Arbiter's perspective after the encounter with the Gravemind. He gets sent to the control room where he finds the results of the battle between the brutes and elites. Elites' bodies can be found throughout this level, and it overall has a sadder tone, especially with the music. But even at this point, the Arbiter still doesn't fully realize that the Great Journey is a lie. Even the other elites think that the brutes have betrayed them because they're just going on a rampage. The Arbiter is the only one who knows that the whole thing was ordered by the prophets. From a presentation perspective, this level is brilliant. The visuals are gorgeous. We can see the control room in the distance, and the part that we're in is the forest area next to it. It looks really good from an art style point of view. The presentation is good, but unfortunately I can't say the same thing for the gameplay. As we're playing as elites, the only enemy we fight here is brutes, which are not fun to fight. They take way too many hits and don't act or use the environment in an interesting way. They just suck. It's not fun to play a level where the only enemy you fight is brutes. They are also quite strong, even on normal difficulty, which is what I was playing on. Their weapons are powerful and annoying to play against. They use the brute shot, which is a new grenade launcher type of weapon, and they even use the human shotgun. This is a cool detail because it shows their lack of honor compared to the elites. They don't care if they use a human weapon as long as it gets the job done. And it does. It certainly gets the job done, and it's very irritating. The brutes use it, which means you can pick it up too, but even the shotgun takes 2 or 3 hits to kill one of them. I don't know if I'm being a little harsh here, but I do not like the combat encounters in this level. I did not enjoy Uprising that much, and I thought it was quite frustrating. There are on-foot parts both indoors and outside in the forest, and there is a vehicle section in the middle of the mission where you ride a ghost. I don't mind the ghost section as much, but even still the ghost shows how the brutes are giant bullet sponges, because sometimes they can even survive being rammed. The whole section is kind of annoying. The mission ends similarly to Gravemind in that it is kind of abrupt. If you remember how I talked about the early levels being in pairs, and depending on how you think about it, the later levels could be in pairs too. You could think about Gravemind and Uprising as a pair, because they're both the missions where Master Chief and Arbiter first go to the place they were sent by the Gravemind. The other way of thinking about it, and the more sensical way of thinking about it, is the two pairs being Gravemind and High Charity, which is the next Master Chief level, and Uprising and the Great Journey, which is the final level where you play as the Arbiter. This would make more sense because the pairs are based on who you play as, and the story that follows that character. But the pairs aren't like before where you have 2 levels as either the Chief or the Arbiter, then you switch back to the other character. Now you switch back and forth each level for the last 4 levels. This is why I said it feels abrupt, because before, you would switch to the other character after a part of the story had been wrapped up, whereas Gravemind ended in the middle of the Master Chief going through High Charity, and Uprising ends in the middle of Arbiter going to the control room. It's not a huge deal, I just wanted to point it out because it is a noticeable change. So the next level is High Charity. This is a short level where we play as the Master Chief running through High Charity trying to stop Truth, trying to catch him. It picks up right where we left off with him, and that was the cutscene at the end of Gravemind, where the Flood arrived and Mercy died. The Flood arriving here and the addition of the Gravemind to the game truly shows how much of a threat the Flood is. In Halo 1, they were basically just mindless zombies with a little bit of intelligence, but now we can see how threatening they are to the entire galaxy. Just one Gravemind was able to wipe out the entirety of High Charity, and the Forerunners had to fight armies of them. There is an interesting detail about Mercy's death here. It is fairly well known, so you probably know what I'm about to say. It's that the prophets all have ironic deaths, and the irony is in their names. Mercy died because Tartarus and Truth didn't show him mercy. Regret died after he went to Earth with a small fleet because he didn't know it was humanity's homeworld. Truth dies in Halo 3 after the Covenant, which was built on lies, falls apart. The Arbiter, who discovered the real Truth, kills him. So as Mercy is dying, Chief asks him where Truth is going, and Mercy tells him. The level follows Chief as he runs through the flood-infected High Charity as he tries to catch up with Truth. Going back to what I said earlier about the hierarchy of the Covenant and the living conditions the lower classes had to deal with, this would be absolutely terrifying to live through in the lower parts of the city. There's nothing you can do to stop the Flood from getting to you. The Flood is slowly taking over and there's nowhere to escape to. On a gameplay level, we fight both brutes and Flood, but a lot of them you can just run past. I don't really have much to say about the gameplay of this level. It's more corridors, I don't mind it. I don't think it's frustrating like Uprising, it's manageable. So I'm not going to waste your time talking about the gameplay. At the end of the mission, Master Chief leaves Cortana on High Charity and gets into the Forerunner ship we've been able to see in the middle of the city. The ship goes to Earth and that's it. Master Chief's story ends there. It is unfortunate, it leaves you wanting more, which I suppose is a good thing. I'll have more to say later, as this isn't the last time we see the Master Chief, so on to the next mission. The final mission follows the Arbiter as he fights his way to the control room to stop Tartarus from lighting the ring. Unlike his last mission, I think this one is actually quite enjoyable. I think the combat encounters are well done, and I think it's an excellent mission. There are still some flaws in the gameplay, such as the final fight with Tartarus, which is less than great, but most of the mission is great. It starts out with a vehicle section where you drive a Wraith, and you fight alongside the shipmaster, who uses a Spectre. I don't have anything to complain about here. You fight ghosts mostly, and it's fun. After this, you go indoors where you fight with hunters, which has to be one of the coolest moments in all of Halo. You fight against brutes, but I don't think it's as bad as Uprising, because of the allies on your side that help to make it so the brutes aren't only targeting you. On a visual level, it's very nice to look at, especially the part where you're in what looks like a cave, and also during the outdoor sections. After more fighting, you reach the top. There's a scarab and Sergeant Johnson is the one driving it. You make a truce and he says he can get the door to the control room open. So you get in a Banshee and start heading that way, which is pretty rough. There's turrets on the sides of the cliffs, wraiths on the ground, and enemy Banshees to deal with. On the other hand, this truce is incredibly awesome. This is the point where the Arbiter finally realizes that the Great Journey is a lie. It's so cool to see the Arbiter and Sergeant Johnson on the same side, especially in the cutscene when you get inside the room to find Tartarus. This cutscene is very well done, because it has the Arbiter try to show Tartarus that what he's doing is wrong, and that the prophets have lied to them. The Oracle even directly states the purpose of the rings and what will happen when they're fired. The Arbiter finally realizes the Prophets have betrayed them after making a truce with Sergeant Johnson of all people, and hearing from an oracle on multiple occasions what will happen when the rings are fired. Tartarus considers for a second if what he's hearing is true, but his ignorance takes a hold of him. He would rather die than realize that his whole life he has been living a lie. And so we fight him and kill him with the help of some elites and Sergeant Johnson. The fight itself is not great. He has a ton of health and he one-shots you with his hammer if you get close. Once Tartarus is dead, Miranda grabs the index from the center of the structure, which stops the ring from lighting. The Oracle explains that because the ring was deactivated right before it would have gone off, all of the rings can be activated remotely from the Ark. Then it cuts to Earth where a fight is happening in space, and the ship from earlier with Chief inside arrives through a slip space portal, and this is where the game ends. That's a lie. There's one more scene where Cortana is on High Charity being interrogated by the Gravemind. So at the end of the game, Master Chief is on his way down to Earth in the ship. The Ark is still unknown except for the fact that all the rings can be lit from that location. And Cortana is still on High Charity with the Flood. This ending did not leave me satisfied with the story. It left me wanting more. Of course, I know how the story ends. I can only imagine what it would have been like to play this when it came out and have to wait 3 years to find out how the story ends. But at the end of the day, whatever way you look at it, this is not a good ending. It does not wrap up the story in a satisfying way, and this is due to the troubled development. The development of Halo 2 was not smooth. We've all heard the horror stories of what it was like. There were a lot of things that would have happened if Bungie had more time. The story would have been drastically different and arguably worse than the one we got, even with the cliffhanger ending. Halo 2 was planned to be the final Halo game. There wasn't supposed to be a Halo 3. The story was meant to be finished in Halo 2. The Ark was originally planned to be a giant Forerunner temple on Earth, and the story would end with the humans and the elites teaming up to stop Truth from getting there and activating the rings. It would take place in a desert and would have numerous large battles, including a fight between 2 scarabs. There would have been a race to the control room, where the Arbiter and Truth would face off. There would have been the reveal that the Forerunners were actually just humans from many years ago. The cliffhanger, while it was bad at the time, allowed Bungie to fully realize what the end of the story should be and gave them the opportunity to make the best ending they could. The ending of the story was cut from Halo 2, but there was loads of other content that was cut. There were vehicles meant to be added to the game that never made it. The situation with the vehicles put Bungie in a predicament because they had to decide whether they wanted to add more vehicles or polish the ones they already had and fix them up a bit. I talked about the vehicles and how they're better than their counterparts in the first game, and I believe Bungie made the right choice of fixing the vehicles they already had rather than adding new ones. Like I said earlier, the vehicles roster feels good to use, and while it would have been nice to have a few more vehicles in the game, it doesn't feel like we're lacking a lot of crucial parts. Many levels were cut from the game, including one in the Covenant ship Master Chief blows up with a bomb after Cairo Station. There was going to be a level where Master Chief goes through tunnels on Delta Halo before coming into contact with the Gravemind, which again was made into a cutscene. There was so much content that was planned, but there was no way it was all going to end up in the final cut of the game, even if they had one more year. This is something that people say, that they should have had one more year to work on Halo 2. Even with another year, all of this would not have made it into the game. This also wouldn't work because of the Xbox 360 coming out. The Xbox 360 was coming out in 2005, so there was no way Microsoft would have let one of their biggest games be released on the old Xbox. Microsoft also would not have let Halo 2 have another year to finish up its story, because that would mean that one of their biggest games was now over, or at least it would be drastically different when it continued. It would be too much of a risk for Halo to completely change after just 2 games had been released. So that was a lot. Halo 2 is an incredible game, even with its many flaws. The story was groundbreaking, and the sandbox and level design were amazing. If you sat through all of that, I cannot thank you enough for watching. You really are a real one. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to do the YouTube things if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Regret continues from Delta Halo. Half of this level is spending on a gondola. Yo, what the hell did I just say?